History is filled with true stories that sometimes seem bizarre and hard to believe. But since we're only taught the most important history lessons in school, there are millions of strange history facts that many of us have never heard of, proving that sometimes the truth is truly stranger than fiction. Number 5. In October of 1941, when, despite recent advances in the sport, parachuting was still in its infancy, daredevil George Hopkins decided that he wanted to set a world record for the most jumps in a single day. He planned on doing 30 jumps, and in an attempt to drum up publicity for the stunt, he decided to do a single jump to a small landing area on Devil's Tower, a 1,200-foot monolith in Wyoming. Not only would this attract a lot of people, but he also aimed to win a $50 bet that he had made with a friend. Hopkins planned to land on the tower and to then descend to the bottom with the use of a 1,000-foot rope, a feat that had never been attempted before. At the time, Hopkins held 2 world records in parachuting, the first for having completed 2,347 jumps, and the second for jumping from the greatest height of 26,400 feet. Hopkins did attract a lot of publicity, but not for the reasons that he had intended. His jump went off as planned, and he landed on top of Devil's Tower. But when the plane made another pass to drop his climbing equipment, it missed the mark, and the equipment dropped over the side of the tower. A second rope was dropped, but Hopkins found that it was too tangled to use, and he was left to spend the night on the tower in rainy conditions. The following day, thousands of spectators and reporters descended on the scene, while a ranger and licensed climbing guide put together a rescue team. 6 days after becoming stranded on the tower, the rescue party made it to the top of the tower, where they had lunch with Hopkins before making their way back down together. All in all, over 7,000 people had flocked to watch this bizarre historic incident unfold, and Hopkins ended up working with the military, teaching soldiers to jump and land safely while using their parachutes. Number 4. Aeschylus, an ancient Greek playwright, lived from 524 to 455 BC, and is considered to be the father of tragedy in theater. He was also a member of a cult that worshipped Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and agriculture. The cult claimed to have secret knowledge of the afterlife and forbade its members from revealing any of these secrets to members of the public. But Aeschylus was soon accused of godlessness when he revealed many of the secrets on stage and had to flee to the theater of Dionysus when an angry mob came for him. At his trial, he claimed that he didn't know about the specific law, and he was acquitted as the jury was sympathetic to the military service that he'd completed during the Persian Wars. He would go on to complete approximately 90 days, but despite his mastery of the art, many people remember him for the bizarre way that he passed away. In 458 BC, Aeschylus traveled to Sicily, as he often did, to enter playwriting competitions. He stayed in the city of Gela at the time, and had taken to living outdoors as a prophecy had foretold that his life would be ended by a falling object. As he was sitting outside the city, an eagle or vulture flew overhead with a tortoise held in its talons. These birds are known for dropping their prey onto hard objects, such as rocks, from great heights to open shells more easily. The bird mistook Aeschylus's bald head for a rock and dropped the tortoise directly onto it, ending his life. The incident was retold by Latin writer Valerius Maximus, who was known for his historical anecdotes, cementing his fate in strange history forever. But luckily, Aeschylus's demise didn't overshadow his works, as his plays were so highly regarded that they were the only works that were allowed to be restaged at future competitions. He also inspired his 2 sons as well as his nephew to follow in his footsteps, with all 3 men eventually becoming playwrights in their own right. Number 3. In 1904, the Olympic Games were hosted in America for the first time in St. Louis in Missouri as part of the World Fair. But before the Games were over, it had produced one of the strangest true stories in the history of the Olympic Games. The main event of the Games was the men's marathon, which was meant to honor Greece's heritage, But it will forever go down in history as one of the strangest events to ever occur during the Olympics. Among the favorites in the race were Americans Sam Mellor, A.L. Newton, George Lorden, Michael Spring, and Thomas Hicks, who had all competed in marathons in the past. But the rest of the field was made up of mostly middle-distance runners and amateurs, including a bricklayer, 10 Greek men who were running their first ever marathon, 2 South Africans who decided to run barefoot, and a Cuban mailman. At 3:03 p.m. on the 30th of August, the starting pistol sounded and the race was on. The course was 24.85 miles long and took place on roads that were covered in inches of dust. Added to this was the fact that runners had to dodge traffic during the race, and there were only 2 spots where they could drink water, at the 6th mile and the 12-mile marks. One runner was hospitalized soon after the start as the dust affected his esophagus and stomach lining, and one of the South African participants ended up running a mile off course after he was chased by dogs. The race leader stopped at an orchard to eat a few apples, not knowing that they were rotten, and after suffering from stomach cramps, he decided to stop for a nap. At the 9-mile mark, the bricklayer, Fred Lors, started to suffer from cramps and decided to hitch a ride in a car, waving at spectators as he passed them by. After 11 miles, he exited the car and kept running, despite being spotted by one of his opponent's handlers and being ordered off the course. He ended the race as the winner with a time of just less than 3 hours. But just as Alice Roosevelt lowered his gold medal around his neck, someone called out that he had cheated. He claimed that he never intended to accept the medal, but only finished the race in jest. Thomas Hicks was now in the lead, but not doing well. He was given a mixture of egg whites and strychnine, which is said to have perked him up, though he had to be carried over the finish line by his trainers, where he was ultimately declared the winner after suffering from bouts of hallucination. Number 2. The 17th century saw the discovery of many natural and technological wonders, such as microscopes, telescopes, calculating machines, and pocket watches. And one man named John Wilkins was inspired by what he saw developing around him. But he had one bizarre passion that stood out above the rest: space travel. He published a book entitled Discovery of a New World, in which he claimed that the moon could be habitable. It's believed that proceeds from the book were intended to be used towards practically applying his theories, which, given the limited knowledge of gravity and space at the time, seemed entirely probable to those who read his work. Wilkins proposed that he could construct an open chariot capable of delivering men to the moon. The chariot is described as having a vertical rotating sail that extended out from the backrest. He theorized that if the chariot could lift a few men, it could carry them to the moon, where they could comfortably land on its wheels. He also claimed that since the men would be free from gravity, work would take almost no effort, and so food would not be necessary. He also believed that each planet and moon had inhabitants living on it, and so he would find new and exciting people with whom to trade. So believable was his theory that it made it to the experimental phase at a college in Oxford, where he worked as a warden. Wilkins and philosopher Robert Hooke experimented with various flying machines, but their research was never documented as it was unsuccessful. Wilkins would continue to pursue his theory, believing that conditions in space were identical to Earth's atmosphere, until experiments carried out by Hooke and Robert Boyle showed that space was in fact a vacuum that would not be survivable. This finally convinced him to abandon his space exploration research, and he decided to shift his focus to improving the accuracy of clocks. But Wilkins was still held in high regard by fellow natural philosophers after he coined the term cell in biology, and he became one of the founders of the Royal Society of Science in England. Number 1. Edgar Allan Poe is known as one of the greatest poets that ever lived, the first person to ever write a story in the detective fiction genre, and one of the first ever contributors to the science fiction genre. He was also the first well-known writer to make a living from writing alone, and this caused him to lead a life filled with financial troubles that were further exacerbated by the Panic of 1837, a financial crisis that lasted until the mid-1840s. Publishers at the time were also known to refuse payments to writers, or to pay them later than agreed, and so Poe was left with no other option but to make humiliating pleas for money or food. In August of 1835, he became the assistant editor for the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond, Virginia. But he soon lost his position after he showed up for work while intoxicated. He decided to move to Baltimore, where he secured a license to marry his cousin, Virginia, with whom he eventually moved back to Richmond with after he was reinstated at the Messenger. Here, he and Virginia got married, and many of his short stories and poems were published. In 1939, he became the assistant editor of Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, and again he published several of his stories, but he made little money for his work, as they were received with mixed reviews. He would go on to write for the monthly Graham's magazine, and attempted to join President John Tyler's administration. But when he failed to show up for a meeting due to being intoxicated again, he missed his chance as all the positions had been filled. His alcoholism worsened when Virginia passed away in 1847, and subsequent efforts at relationships failed due to his increasingly erratic behavior and drinking. On the 3rd of October, 1849, Joseph Walker, a compositor for the Baltimore Sun, found Poe lying in a gutter at a public house called Gunner's Hall. He was delirious and obviously in distress, dressed in second-hand shabby clothes and unable to move. Witnesses described him repeatedly calling the name Reynolds, though it was never discovered who he was referring to. He never recovered from the bizarre incident, and to this day, it's not known who Reynolds was or how he ended up in the street's gutter, and his demise remains a historic mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.